What do they want to do with that 1 trillion euros? And almost more importantly, where are they going to get it?
Thanks, Alix. So the European Commission announced in December its plans to take the European Union to a point of carbon neutrality by 2050. But they have a shorter-term goal by 2030 to reduce by half the bloc's total emissions from 1990 levels. This is what we're calling borrowing from the United States, the Green Deal. And this 1 trillion euro figure is essentially the investment volume that the European Commission is going to be pushing towards reaching this target by 2030. So the funds are going to come from quite a really complicated cobweb of different European sources, programs, and mechanisms, many of which actually are already operating now. So on the one hand, we have the EU budget, which will be putting in more than half of that 1 trillion euro total. The European budget has already committed to earmark 25% of its spending towards climate and environment goals. Some revenue from the European emissions trading scheme will also be supporting the energy transition. And then on the other side, a program called InvestEU has been created to try and get other public sector and also private sector actors involved, who ultimately will be drawn upon to support more than a quarter of this total 1 trillion figure.
And part of that is the EU ETS funds, right? We think ETFs, but that's not what you're talking about. What is it, and sort of what kind of money can come in?
Exactly. So the European Union has a carbon tax, and any industries or power producers that are producing carbon have to pay something for those allowances, and those allowances are traded on a free market. So BNEF actually produces a long-term forecast for the carbon prices, and some of the revenue from that market is actually used to support the energy transition. This isn't actually a new mechanism. The member states keep some of the revenue, but some of it also goes to what we call the modernization fund and also the innovation fund. The EU is counting on around 25 billion euros from these funds over the next decade. BNEF's forecast actually suggests that that figure might reach 30 billion, but because these revenues are drawn from a market-based mechanism, it's not actually going to be a stable source of revenue, although the tool is tried and tested.
So to round it out with your work, where are they going to fall short? What's the biggest, weakest link?
I think that there are actually going to be a number of challenges. One of the first is quite imminent, which is the UK's departure from the EU, which will leave behind what's being called a Brexit gap in the EU budget. Another challenge will face those public sector and private sector investors in terms of understanding what is considered a green investment. The EU has agreed on where they want to be by 2030, but stakeholders have yet to reach a consensus on the best pathway to reach that point. One other major challenge is just the scale of this transformation. Some European countries are really at the forefront of the energy transition, while others still have a long way to go. These funds are supposed to help those that have fallen a bit behind catch up so that the bloc as a whole can reach its targets.